you mind them play for free. See them a say me too flat, but I like that. Heard a drive and a me a the pilot. Any boy violate them, a man a fly that. Can't this unruly, pussy don't try that. Some of them no want work, not even buying daughter's skirt. Hustling and my grandma work hard fi take care of Rihanna. Boy, you know why help your mother, you know why help your brother. You vex every time you see a youth I climb up the ladder. You can't just a higgle. Me granny tell me say you might need one private. Why? Can't just a higgle. Tell you what, idlers, the devil will find you. We work hard till the thing up plug in like TV. Them no know when Tuggy and Grizzly that give a man CD. Because Tyrone tell them man I start from grade 3. And true man wicked and bad, no boy couldn't page me. Up to now. Well, I rise to the top and I got them now I see. Hey, watch out to the heart too nasty. Them to the woman a real gringo, a man a no Bill Cosby.
Good morning, people.
You are tuned in to Frontline FM.
Yeah, man. You're here with your host K-Way, and this is Frontline FM. So today, I was meant to do the news the other day, but I got a bit caught up. So today we're going to do a deep dive into the news, current affairs, public affairs, and let's look at what's going on in the world. Let's look at what's happening in the UK, look at what's happening in the African diaspora in particular, around the world, and just world news as well. So yeah, man, without further ado, let's get straight into it. If you enjoyed some of the music at the start of this stream, you can access that at Mixcloud Frontline FM, or what's called again on SoundCloud Frontline FM again. There's mixes there, SoundCloud, reggae, Afro beats, all sorts. So Frontline FM, go check that out. But yeah, without further ado, let's get straight into the news, man. Alright, so the first video we're going to look at is what's happening in Burkina Faso. So if you don't know, the Sahel region, which is the transitional region between the Sahara and what they call the Guinea. Guinea is like a Spanish word, in it, and it's a Spanish, it's a Latinization or Spanish, I don't know what the word is, but of a Berber word, which they used to refer to where the tropical regions where black Africans inhabited, in contrast to at the time north of the Sahel, which was inhabited by Berbers, Arabs that migrated, as well as darker skinned inhabitants. But at that time, so the Sahel is the transition between those two regions, it traditionally also referred to as the Sudan, not the country, but the Sudan, which means an Arab land of the blacks. So traditionally, the part of the Sahara onwards, all the way to the Guinea, which is inhabited by black people, it's mostly savanna, grassland, and a big part of it is also that whole region used to be part of the trans-Saharan economy, it's a predominantly a region inhabited predominantly by various different Islamic historical empires, West African empires, Islamic empires, but you have a lot of Muslims there. You have as well as Christians, but predominantly this area is predominantly Muslim, and you also have traditional African religions in. But the reason this is in the news is because it has become a hotbed for quote unquote terrorism, for quote unquote jihadism. And to contextualize this, let's watch this video first. I don't want to talk too much first, but I'll contextualize this after we watch this video.
So we're driving, we've seen 15 or 20 or so at least families just like this walking from Barcelona to Kaya. It's about 45 kilometers, it's going to take them about 3 days. Until recently, Burkina Faso, a small majority Muslim country in West Africa, was relatively peaceful. But over the last few years, Al-Qaeda, ISIS and other armed groups who have devastated neighbouring Mali and Niger have been able to cross over porous borders and launch increasingly vicious attacks. The impact on civilians here has been devastating, and hundreds of thousands have had to flee their homes. This family has just walked through the night after another brutal attack. There are IDP camps here, but over 85% of the internally displaced people are sheltered and fed by host communities, where entire villages led by generous volunteers like Chief Diambende share everything they have. Can you just describe the attack that made you flee here? Did you manage to come with every member of your family? We drove north, further into the Sahel, the vast region beneath the Sahara Desert that stretches across Africa, and which many worry is fast becoming the next lawless spectre.
So that is exactly what I was talking about.
We drove north, further into the Sahel, the vast region beneath the Sahara Desert that stretches.
So here, this is all the Sahel. This is a transitional region from what they would refer to as the Guinea or sub-Saharan Africa to the Sahara. Ironically, a lot of the Sahel countries incorporate most of the Sahara, apart from Algeria, but most of the Sahara actually, especially countries like Mauritania, Niger, actually have a large portion of the Sahara. But historically, everything south of so from the Sahel onwards was considered what is called Sudan now, Sudan, which basically just referred to land of the blacks. So it was just the black part of the Sahara. But yeah, so this is mostly savanna, mostly inhabited by nomads, pastoralists, and then I'll get more into it. Let's continue watching the video, but I don't want to talk too much before
across Africa,
some of the main
which many worry is fast becoming
details of the video,
where terrorists can roam freely, enrich themselves and attract foreign fighters. ISIS have even bragged that the loss of their caliphate meant nothing because of the bases they're building here. Just 5 days earlier, one of the deadliest attacks so far occurred here, when at least 36 people were killed in a market as they shopped for food. We spoke with the survivors, who fled with the bodies of their loved ones.
never tab you to never tab to be to pour bam to me bam and degala
Sanda Palmer Road in Paris, the cow road in Pambonku, and you never halakam in their villa.
These graves are just 4 days old. All of the victims of the attack are buried together here.
C'est tout yada hada shit in song kunamba tene fa pamaro. Ni bui de fa yeme. Don't you don't have pepum yeda and pepum.
Do you have any idea who they were or why they were attacking you?
Okay, so this is another one, the Fulani. So who are the Fulani? I'm going to elaborate again on the Fulani because me as someone of Nigerian descent, I'm half Nigerian on my father's side. And as pertains to Nigerian politics right now, Fulani is also the people you hear about quite a lot. But the Fulani in the Nigerian context is a bit different to the rest of West Africa. But what you do need to know about the Fulani is the Fulani are nomadic peoples that like some of the tribes of the Sahel actually believed to be somewhere further up north, probably from Senegal or Mauritania. It's believed this to be the case for the Haus and some other tribes, and they migrated further south. But the Fulani, what's it called again? Sorry, man. Someone just sent me a real message, man. Hey, big up Fear. If big up David, man. Big up yourselves, man. But flipping, yeah, man. What was I gonna say? Yeah, man. The Fulani are a nomadic tribe. Now a lot of the how would I say? A lot of the tribes. There's quite a few tribes in that part of Africa that speak Afro-Asiatic languages, such as the Hausa, which have more in common with Arabic and what's it called again? Berber and Hebrew than it does other Niger Congo or Bantu languages that are spoken in West Africa, particularly further south in the Guinea region, like I spoke. However, and that is attributed usually to the fact that all Afro-Asiatic peoples is believed to have a common ancestor in Ethiopia that migrated out of the Horn of Africa into the Near East, into the Levant, into southern Arabia, most likely, and then migrated back into Africa, into different regions, in particular heading towards the Lake Chad Basin, because it was believed at the time the Sahara was a lot more greener, Lake Chad was much more larger, but at a certain time also desertified, so this would have encouraged pastoralists, nomads to move out of Africa. Then when it became green again, people migrated back inwards at the time, especially as the rest of the world, potentially the Middle East, was desertifying. Whereas the Fulani, from what I know, even though due to their proximity to tribes like the Hausa, probably do have some Afro-Asiatic admixture, they aren't actually an Afro-Asiatic speaking tribe, but because of their because they are nomads, also because they profited from the trans-Saharan trade, they are scattered throughout the Sahel and Western North Africa. So they are very prominent in the history of that region. But they are nomadic people and pastoralists. In fact, it's believed, what's it called again? In America, a lot of the cattle rearing traditions actually came from Fulani slaves who were there and would have taught different ways of what's it called again, raising cattle and sheep that had more or in line with the traditions of the Fulani nomadic pastoralist tradition, as opposed to the European settled farm tradition. But this is also because of the reason also there was a significant portion of Fulani that were slaves in the Americas, because the Fulani are also one of the tribes that participated the most in slavery. So yeah, the Fulani are Bantu speaking, I believe, peoples. I'll double check that. But culturally, in the Sahel, they have more in common with people such as the Songhai or the Tuareg or the Hausa, due to their history of being nomadic, being pastoralist, being Muslim, and also partaking in the trans-Saharan trade. So culturally, they are integrated into the West African culture, but more so integrated into the Islamic world and the wider North African and Northwest African world of the Sahel. So I'll break down a bit more of the ethnic politics, but I just wanted to, for those that don't understand who the Fulani is, and they go by different names. In fact, I'll pull up the Fulani right here. So yeah, they go by Fula, Fulbe, I think Pul as well. But yeah, like I said, they're in Central Africa, Sudan, Darfur, West Africa. Yeah, they're the largest nomadic pastoral community in the world. So they're bigger than the Tuareg. They're bigger than what's it called again? Bedouin Arabs. These are the OG nomads. You get what I'm saying? They're everywhere. But we'll get more into the Fulani. In particular, my mum actually does a lot of research on the Fulani, as it pertains to their education. So she knows a lot more about the Fulani than me. But they are very important to this narrative that is what's going on, not only just in Burkina Faso, but the rest of the Sahel.
Despite being the second largest ethnic group in Burkina Faso, the Fulani, traditionally nomadic herders, have long been treated as an underclass. Groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda have exploited resentment among the Fulani and targeted them for recruitment. This has led to a common perception, including among the government military, that all Fulani are terrorists, increasing ethnic tensions and fueling the violence. Last May, this schoolboy was rounded up with over 50 Fulani men and driven to a military camp. He agreed to talk to us, but only if he could hide his face.
Il y a les vieux, il y a des enfants, il y a des aveugles même qui sont parmi.
Did they tell you why they were taking people? You know, did they accuse you of sheltering the terrorists or knowing about the terrorists or even being terrorists?
Moi, comme ils n'ont pas posé les questions avant, ce que moi je sais, c'est le fait qu'ils embarquaient. Et c'est là, en cours de route, ils ont exécuté 16 personnes sur place. Ils les ont demandé de se coucher. Et ils ont tiré sur eux. Le lendemain, ils faisaient sortir les gens. Un à un, ils leur posaient des questions. Ils ont bastonné certains pour les tuer sur place.
And of those who were taken and were killed or have just never been seen again, were any your family members?
Oui, il y a 4 membres de mon famille qui étaient là. Mon père, et les 3 aussi, c'est ses frères.
Just 15, he was freed because he was so young and now lives alone, sleeping on the floor of this classroom. Have the authorities contacted your family at all to tell you what happened to those 4 relatives of yours?
Vraiment, jusqu'à présent, on n'a pas reçu leur contact.
Military attacks like these are killing almost as many civilians as the terrorists. Entire Fulani communities like this one have been forced to flee their homes.
C'est notre animaux comme ça.
So how many people are living here?
213. Avant le terrorisme, il y a beaucoup de choses qui a fait sur le pays. Tuer tous les villages, brûler leurs maisons. On l'embraque au hasard, puisque avant on dit que c'est l'habitude. Mais là-bas, il y a des djihadistes souvent et viennent et menacent les gens. Mais c'est les forces de l'ordre même qui nous fatiguent plus que les djihadistes. forcer les gens pour rentrer dans la terrorisme.
You think at the very least these policies might be making, the terrorists more attractive to some people?
Bon, c'est comme ça, c'est la politique des gens qui veulent séparer les ethnies.
But ethnic divisions aren't the only thing fueling this crisis. Burkina Faso is one of the poorest nations on earth, but it does have billions of dollars of potential wealth in gold.
And this is at the root of a lot of the conflicts. One is resources. I'm going to bring up multiple points, but I want us to look through the video with DO, but I'm going to bring up some various points. One is post-colonialism. So post-colonialism and where Africa sits within that post-colonial world. And a lot of it is as a resource basin, essentially, for Europe and America. Whereas the people, where the resources sit, follow those resources, but Europe and America want to keep them in Africa, essentially. So that's part of post-colonial Africa. That's a big part of it. And the borders as well. The borders situation and the Berlin Conference that created those borders is real in a lot of ethnic conflicts. That's a big part of it. And blending into that next point is, you can call it Islamic fundamentalism, but really and truly, the rise of Islamic fundamentalism is a reaction to post-colonialism, and I'll go down into that. But it's not Islam. There is the traditional forms of Islam in Africa, but the type of Islamic fundamentalism we see spreading comes from a particular place, come from a particular geopolitical context, and it also not only is it coming from a certain geopolitical context, but it's also a reaction to, in a similar way, communism, while it is probably one of the more extreme versions of Marxist thought, is an extreme reaction to an extreme, post-colonial world, or reaction to a capitalist world. Now, we also live in a neoliberal context, so this is post, that's another factor, post communism. Also, you have to take into consideration the framing of news in general. The villain now is more so going to be focused on terrorism and quote-unquote jihadism, even though I'll explain what jihad means as well, as opposed to the previous boogeyman, which is communism. Whereas this issue has been going on chronologically prior to during the time of communism as well, but it's getting, that's part of also why we're hyper focusing on it now, because this is the new boogeyman. So I'd say we've got post-colonialism, Islamic fundamentalism, and neoliberalism / neocolonialism. Another factor is in the neoliberal, neocolonial is the influence of the French economy, how the French economy works and how it's interdependent on Africa. All right. Another factor of the Islamic fundamentalism is Libya. Libya is very pivotal to a lot of the conflicts going on in Africa right now, in terms of where the weapons came from, in terms of where a lot of the migrants are heading to, in terms of, we'll break all of that down. But one of the heaviest components, I would say, is neoliberalism and neocolonialism, and the way these societies, nations have been structured post-colonialism, not within the political interests of Africans, but to subsidize European and American economies with its resources, while not giving back to those same people. So within that context, people either try and migrate out of Africa from a certain social class, because this is a neoliberal context. So there is actually wealth in Africa now. It's just concentrated within a specific minority that serves the interests of Europe and America, whether they're conscious of it or whether they're not, because that's the way society has been structured. So for the underclass, which is the vast majority of the working class in Africa, they're given the option to migrate out through education. If they don't have necessarily the resources to maximize where that education will take them, depending on their geography, then this is where they start to become, I don't even want to say victim, but they succumb to persuasion from insurgent forces against the state, against essentially the neoliberal corrupt state. Now these insurgent forces in the most extreme form is Islamic fundamentalism, which is actually being imported from another region. It's not native to that part of Africa. But when you look at it geopolitically, like from a wider geopolitical context of not just Africa, but Africa and the Middle East, it makes a lot of sense. But we're going to break all of this down. I just wanted to state this now, so one, I can take a mental note, but two, we're going to, after we watch through the video, so that I don't drag it out for too long.
Much of it untapped, and therefore highly attractive to terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS in need of funding. Most of the gold mines here are small artisanal operations without any security. Despite this, they are full of young, poorly paid workers, many not even teenagers. What's it like for you to work here every day? Do you feel safe working here? Because not far away there are terrorist groups attacking.
And another point, I want to make was ethnicity, which is tied to post-colonialism, but also its own entity as well within Africa. Within even people look at one, even though Africa, it's made of black nations, black people, is two. It's not fully correct because Africa is the most diverse place on earth, and is also the pool of where all humans come from. So all humans, whether you're white, black, Asian, you had a black ancestor that come from Africa, and all of those ancestors are still within Africa today, of all the ethnic groups. So Africa is the most genetically diverse place. We're one black people in terms of we're Africans. But even within that, the Africans that are lighter, the Africans that are darker as well. Do you get what I'm saying? You have Berbers, you have Cushitic, Cushitic. The main categories, you got Afro-Asiatic. You got Niger Congo peoples, you got the Bantu peoples, you got the Nilotic peoples, and you've got the Khoisan. These are the main wider ethnic groups, you get what I'm saying? But they all come from each other. The Niger Congo, the Bantu speaking people come from the Niger Congo. The Niger Congo originate from the Nilotic peoples. Afro-Asiatic peoples originate most likely from Nilotic and Bantu populations migrating from situated where the Horn of Africa is. If you can see it, it's in the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, and you have the Arabia next door, and past that you have the Indian subcontinent. So you also have that migration coming in and out of the African continent that most likely created that admixture. But what I'm trying to say is that Africa is looked at as a monolith, but it's actually a very diverse place, not just in terms of African, quote unquote, African black people, because even outside that you have Arabs, you have Berbers, you have the descendants of Europeans, whether they be Portuguese, Dutch, English, or French. You have, and then even just within Africans themselves, then you have many different tribes just per nation because of that ethnic diversity. Do you get what I'm saying? And yeah, these tribes, it might just be a linguistic difference. It might be, what's it called again? A religious difference. Or it might be the ethnic difference might be the deeper underlying ethnic difference, whether they're Cushitic or they speak a Cushitic language versus a Niger Congo language. But what I'm trying to say is a lot of these ethnicities had their own ways of living prior to colonialism. So whether they were living in kingdoms, empires, sultanates, whether they were nomads, whether they were pastoralists, whether they were farmers, But the current borders of Africa was created in Berlin by the European powers without the consultation of any of these African peoples. And this was to create colonies for Africa, for these European empires, in the same way, if you look at Belgium, was given to King Leopold, and we know he did atrocities in there. He killed 10 million people. We know 3 million people died in the Holocaust. We don't know 10 million people died in Congo. You'd say slavery was abolished, but what happened in Congo was not only slavery, but the beginning of child soldiers and mutilation. That's the start of that. But all of that atrocities contributed to the extraction of rubber. And at the same time, what do you have? You have the automobile. You have Henry Ford. So all those tires, just like now, all the with electric cars, all the raw material to make the batteries comes from Congo. Back then, all the rubber for the tires of the car comes from Congo. And that's just a case study. But those borders for Congo, for every single African country that was created in that Berlin conference, for those European empires. Why? So they wouldn't fight each other. So they could all have a slice of the pie without killing each other. Because they knew the rise of imperialism and the rise of nationalism is only going to bring us more and more into conflicts. So they wanted to collaborate together. They wanted to cut up the pizza and make sure everyone gets a piece of the pie, except for the people that made the pizza, that own the pizza. Do you get what I'm saying? It's a fiefdom. But essentially, a lot of these borders deliberately, especially the colonies set up by the British, because their main thing is divide and conquer, deliberately ran through ethnic groups. So it created nations which aren't represented. It's not like a nation of people. First of all, before you have a nation of state, you have a nation of people. In Africa, actually a lot of the quote-unquote tribes outside of ethnicities are actually nations. Like Yoruba, the Yoruba ethnic group it's a nation. You understand? They have their own philosophy, way of living. They have their own land. They have their own culture, language that predates any of the nation states of Europe, that predates most of modern human history. Goes back past, I'm talking predates Western, a lot of these quote-unquote nations. So I'm not even going to say tribes, I'm going to say nations. And within these nations you have clans. They predate the time of Christ. They predate the Bible. That's how old they are, and they still have continuity to this day. But they were deliberately so that you don't have a nation of people now creating their own nations. You get what I'm saying? The colonies the British, the French made deliberately cut these nations in half. You understand? So often a country in Africa has multiple different ethnic groups that have nothing really to do with each other than the colonial language they speak. And immediately after the Europeans left, these people then started to fight for the resources and power to have their own nations that really served their own interests. Because the reality of it, most of these nation states in Africa, still serve European and American interests. They benefit a few Africans, but the vast majority of people, in particular in the Sahel, don't benefit, and most of it benefits the French economy. So it's natural that these people would then say, okay, if you guys are taking most of our resources and we are a nation and we as a nation are not benefit, let's remove tribe, we as a nation are not benefiting, then okay, we'll form our own nation state and we'll fight for it. Or if we believe in this nation, we'll have a coup d'etat. And that is what generates a lot of the inter-ethnic issues you see in Africa, is the current borders that were drawn in the Berlin Conference. And not to get too deep into it, but so the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, on the 15th of November, is after. So from 26th of February 1885, the Signature General Act for regulating European colonization and trade of Africa in the new imperialism period. What does that mean? Well, what you have to understand is, one, the reason I said nationalism, imperialism was the main thing they were concerned about, because that was what, prior to World War I and World War II, you had the 7 Years' War, which essentially is proto-World War I. And that's what really these wars were about, was European empires the rise of nationalism as well. So national identity, fighting over colonial interests. So they were afraid of this. And the result of that was also America becoming independent. The Americas, while British still had their what's it called again? They still had their colonies in the Caribbean. They'd lost some of their prime colonies in the Americas because of not only American Revolution, but because of it was sat within the context of the 7 Years' War. So the British, they've lost territory in the Americas. These slave societies, which made them so much money, which funded the Industrial Revolution. So that new imperialism was the opportunity for the British to recoup. Do you get what I'm saying? So when they came into Africa, one, the Europeans knew they didn't want to fight each other, and two, they knew that a lot of the assets they'd lost in the Americas as these republics started to establish themselves because of the conflicts they'd been having with each other. They said, okay, we're going to recoup that. Even though these republics ultimately still did serve European interests, they knew they'd made that loss and they wanted to regain it in Africa. So Africa is very different in terms of the way it was set up from the get-go. They didn't have to map the continent. They didn't have to step turf. This was most of the current borders in Africa today come from this conference, the Berlin Conference, and it's literally just straight lines. But yeah, I don't want to get too deep into it. We're going to watch the rest of this video. And then
more and more often, and sometimes attacking areas where there is gold.
I'll make an analysis later on another stream.
Even those working in large foreign-owned gold mines are not safe. In November last year, 5 buses taking workers to a Canadian-owned mine came under attack, despite having a military escort. 37 people were killed.
On était à une trentaine de kilomètres de Ougarou que la blindée des militaires est montée sur la mine et puis ça a sauté. Donc la première balle directement a pris notre chauffeur, donc notre car a heurté et ils ont tiré un peu partout, donc on était tous couchés ensemble. Mais les munitions des militaires n'étaient pas assez. Donc quand les munitions sont finies, ils étaient obligés de replier. Donc on s'est mis en tête directement qu'ils sont partis. Et ils sont rentrés maintenant. Ils ont commencé à tirer sur nous encore. Donc c'est là qu'ils ont tué beaucoup de personnes. Beaucoup de personnes.
How did you survive?
D'abord, je me suis aspergé de sang. Et puis j'ai pris un cadavre, je me suis glissé en bas du cadavre pour le laisser sur moi.
Damn.
Et puis il a commencé à tirer sur les gens. Il a fait au moins 20 minutes dans les tirs. Donc j'étais couché à côté de lui, juste sous ses pieds. Il m'a mis 2 balles dans le dos. Et puis une balle dans le pied, une balle au niveau de la hanche. Mais je n'ai pas crié, je n'ai pas bougé, rien. Donc je suis resté immobile. Vraiment, j'ai survécu comme ça.
Such attacks mean that few aid agencies operate here. The brave relief workers that are here struggle to cope with limited resources. This temporary school is looking after 1,600 children. And what mental state are they in when they arrive here?
Mais un enfant qui arrive qui est dans cette position, qui ne parle pas, et vous lui adressez la parole, même souvent il ne réagit pas. Et quand un enfant s'approche de lui pour jouer, il est violent en fait. On a pris plusieurs fois des petits couteaux ici. Et quand tu demandes à l'enfant pourquoi il se déplace avec, il dit qu'on lui a appris à se défendre avec. Les parents sont d'abord dans le dénuement. Du coup, les filles sont à risque de mariage forcé. La dame est venue depuis, elle dit qu'elle n'a pas de fille. Et il y a une dame qui lui propose 5 000 francs pour prendre sa fille de 8 ans comme bonne. Quand on demande à une fille pourquoi tu n'es pas venue, vous vous rendez compte qu'elle a été donnée en mariage quelque part. Ou bien on l'a placée comme domestique dans une famille.
Before we left Burkina Faso, we went back to the host community run by Chief Diambende. The families who fled here are safe for now, but no one knows how long that will last. When we left, you just received one more family who'd fled from Barcelona. Have you received any more families since then?
I'm local, Lama hand in a hand for hand there. For about a one genie here, Tatwenki. For hand in there, for about a genie at 20. Much when years of Yoka Sapanta, Abanda, Parabana, I am low, I'm good. I'm how what I'm looking for. I'm passable and never 20,000. Tuma Kongo in Anyam.
The chief has taken in so many families since we were last here on Saturday that he now says he has no idea how many people he's looking after. It was 450 people on Saturday. It's now something like 550. And they're now having to huddle on sheets outside on the street because his compound is completely full. One of the aid agencies here says that Burkina Faso as a whole has about 560,000 displaced people.
Boom. So that is the video. Yeah, so right now Burkina Faso, you have insurgents on the rise, with a decent portion of them coming from the Fulani group. Part of this is motivated by the economic deprivation of throughout the whole Sahel, which is kind of partially due to the Sahel and the French West African states being tied to the Franca. A lot of the resources, very mineral rich. It's a very rich mineral rich region that ends up leaving that region. So as a result of all these resources leaving, but the currency is a very weak currency. It's not within the interests of the local population. It doesn't work within that economy. Furthermore, the education within this region fundamentally isn't suited for the nomadic lifestyles of the people, and it's not bringing them, one, into the modern economy, two, it's not helping them live their lifestyle, their traditional lifestyle. So with note of that, in economic deprivation, and a lot of these people turn to insurgents groups, with often them coming in the form of Islamic fundamentalism. And yeah, that's not only being turned against the state, but it's being turned against the people in the most violent and savage of ways. And this is part of the reason why you're seeing throughout the Sahel, as people have had enough, is you're seeing a lot of to contextualize what's going on right now, you're seeing a lot of coups, and these coups are won by the military, which is supported by the people. What's it called again? Because they're tired of essentially the French ruling their country through indirect rule. The French economy is heavily reliant on a lot of these countries' economy, but they're not reaping the benefits back, which is causing this economic depredation and no real plan for the future, causing a lot of people to end up joining insurgents groups. But because of the way these countries are being set up and the inter-ethnic tension, it results in a lot of these insurgents targeting minority ethnic groups or the wider public, resulting in terrorist activity. So right now, the Sahel in general, also because of the pressures put by the West in the Middle East, two, because of, we forget the fact that when we look at movements like ISIS, when we look at I'll have a further breakdown, but essentially they're global movements, and it's a reaction to global capitalism, neoliberalism, and a global neocolonialism. So it's a fundamentalist extreme movement in reaction to that, to differentiate from Islam, because it doesn't represent the entirety of Islam, but it is a political strand of which that comes from a certain context for a certain purpose. And that often so you have that. You also have the fact that Libya, you had the Libyan civil war, so a lot of the weapons that were involved in that have spread throughout that whole region in the Sahel. So and then also you have the post-colonial element of it as well, is that a lot of people within these in particular in the Sahel are very economically disenfranchised because of the post-colonial economy. So a lot of these people that don't have things working in their direction end up joining these very extreme fundamentalist insurgent group, which end up resulting in a lot of ethnic violence. On the flip end of it, the military, which has had enough, is doing coup d'etat to get the French out. which is there's more to it. They're supported by the Russians, but not just the Russians, but also other people you might not know about. But yeah, man, this is Frontline News, giving a breakdown of what's happening in Burkina Faso right now, with the rise of insurgency, terrorism, coup d'etats, but also contextualizing it a bit, and we'll break it down a bit more on my next stream. But today I just wanted to watch the video with you guys, see what you think, and yeah, this is Frontline News. I hope you guys enjoyed.
You are tuned in to Frontline FM.
Yeah, man, we out, guys. I'll see you soon.